Hello, welcome to my grandpa's train. Today on the workbench is more Lionel HO. This is the top of the line HO as far as features is concerned. This is the 0647 Pacific steam locomotive and its accompanying whistling tender. As you can see underneath, there's a complete motor and relay mechanism that triggers a whistle inside this tender. That's why the tender is actually super jumbo, because it has the whistle back here and the motor and the contactor. Right now, though, we're going to focus on getting the locomotive running again. And we'll do basic clean and servicing on this guy and then test it out. Now, I did set this on the tracks earlier and nothing happened with the locomotive, but the whistle actually sort of ran not very well. These were never known to be super high-performing whistles, but the fact that it still works is pretty neat, and we'll test that out a little later. So first thing we're going to do is take apart the locomotive and get the motor going again. To get inside these, the 0625s, the non-smoking units, had a screw in the smokestack, and then the whole thing slides off a pin in the cab. This one is just a thumb screw because these have smoke featured. So to get in the shell off, you twist the top of the smokestack and the big giant screw thing comes out. Actually, these are fancier railings. So let's see, we need to get these railings out because these are going to be separated. So these railings are a little fancier on this one. The original ones weren't as, they didn't go all the way down the front steps. They just ended in a hole right there. These are a little bit nicer. Yeah, this is definitely a step up. Also, we can see underneath, they, I believe, improved the motor and drive gear on this, so it should be much more reliable. Whereas the earlier ones had a goofy jack shaft that ran from the motor to a straight gear and then a shaft to the gear that drove the center axle, whereas this one drives a single large gear in the rear. Makes a lot more sense and should be a lot more reliable and quieter. So what we need to find out is if our motor runs, so let's get the shell off and get into it. Oh, and there is nothing holding the front on at all. And that is pretty much how the shell comes off. Sort of violent. So it looks like I'm going to have to replace the screw up here. And everything else is the same. Oh yeah, look at that. Much better design in here. Giant worm gear, smooth, and then a giant, I think it's phenolic gear down here. I'll have to do something about these wheels. This one's rusty. The rest look fine. So hopefully it's not locked up. And that's just coming right apart. So that's kind of handy. So we'll finish taking this apart and get it ready to clean up. So there's our pilot. That broke. Yeah, that's supposed to be attached to the frame. Ooh, that's a problem. This motor is just locked up. Well, now we're back on the Lionel HO 0647. All right, so last night I made some repairs to the frame and the motor, and let's see how these turned out. So we're looking at the frame. I have this one, which is an updated version for the slightly different design. I brought out an older one from the earlier design. You can see there's actually quite a lot of changes they made to the chassis to get this to work. Starting in the back, the motor basket is a lot larger and it's square. So in theory, you could fit an even bigger motor in this. And then, of course, because it's driven off the rear axle instead of the center, there's a larger slot in the rear. And underneath, it's actually wide open because the gear is so large that it sticks all the way through there. Moving down to the front, the center and front axles are the same. There's no slot for the jack shaft in this one. And up to here it's the same. The mount to the front bit is the same. And then they changed the pilot on the newer one. And this one has steps they built in, which is kind of cool. Unfortunately, this one had a failure in the casting. The casting had a air pocket in it, and it made it very weak right here, so it broke apart eventually. But nothing a little JB Weld can't take care of. And then, of course, when the steam or the smoke unit is installed, that actually screws down to there, and that helps hold it tight as well. I want to take a look at the motor. I've tried doing this repair on a different one, and it did not go quite as well. One reason was that the wiring didn't have enough slack in order to make the repair. So now I was actually able to glue the commutator pad back down with super glue, and it fit on there without bending because there was enough slack in the windings that it allowed it to sit tight on the commutator pad. The earlier models have not quite enough slack, so when you try to attach it, it'll break the wire off when you try to flatten it back down. Hopefully, the other two pads will remain stuck down and not fall apart. The copper wire on this looks a little bit better quality than the earlier stuff too. That or this was rewound, but I don't think so. All right, well, check this out. I got the 647 locomotive operating. So the motor's back together. I repaired one of the commutator pads that had fallen off, and this motor had enough slack in the wire to allow that repair, which was nice. The other thing with the motor I had to do was shim the front of it just a tiny amount. So underneath where the screw and the motor meet, it was locking it down so tight that it wouldn't allow the worm and the gears to spin. It was tight too much. So putting that little bitty shim in there actually lifted the worm gear up just enough so it meshes correctly now. I might do a little bit more fine tuning on that, possibly. And then I have the frame repaired. It's all stuck back together. And then I have the smoke unit and headlight assembly and then the side rods put back on. And we can see that operate. Let's take a look. That thing actually looks really good. I was quite surprised. It's possibly one of the best working features of this locomotive. Now this engine uses a piston inside the piston to puff the smoke out the smokestack, and it doesn't have a really good seal down here. A lot of the smoke fluid gets pushed back down the piston and it actually leaks. I wouldn't consider that a feature necessarily. I don't think these are actually supposed to smoke down there. So I actually I might try putting a little bit of grease in there to seal that up. It's leaking out of a lot of places. It's leaking back here too. Well, here's something interesting about this locomotive. This engine has more electrical pickup than any of the earlier versions, and it includes these two wires that connect to the tender. For two purposes, I suspect that this engine, since it has the whistling tender, needs the best possible electrical contact to the rails so that the whistle doesn't trigger accidentally, which is very easily done in the design of the whistle mechanism. This locomotive has metal wheels on the ground side from the pilot, the main drivers, of course, and then the rear pickup as well, the trailing truck. I don't believe that the earlier locomotives had that at all, where these were both plastic and these were all plastic, and they didn't do any electrical pickup. But this, plus the pickup from the tender, not only will improve the operation of the whistle in the tender, but it should hopefully improve the operation of the motor itself in the steam engine. Whereas the earlier locomotives only had these 6 wheels for electrical pickup, and on the positive side, which is over here, the center wheel doesn't really do anything at all because it's not connected to the pickup shoe. So the spring pickup only touches this wheel and this wheel on the positive side of the locomotive. And then, of course, up here, these two are plastic insulated wheels, and this one is a plastic insulated wheel. Whereas on the ground side, all of the wheels on this side, well, except for this one, because this is a traction tire, are connected to the rail. So that is an improvement. And there's a spring underneath the pilot truck, and there's actually a copper leaf spring underneath the trailing truck to keep it pressed up against the rails. So they definitely made some improvements on this later version. So the next thing we're going to do is put the shell on it, and I'm going to take it to the tracks and do some rail testing. And then we'll get to work on the tender. So here is the whistling tender. Now to get inside this, first you have to remove the coal load off the top of the tender, which I've already done. There's a slot here that you press in, and the coal load pops out. You also have to remove both trucks, which are screwed down. And then in order to get the motor out for the whistle, you actually have to pry this plastic cover off, which is glued down, but in this case it's actually loosened up for me, which is nice. So all I have to do is remove that like that, and then in order to get the motor out, you remove these two bolts. Although first you actually have to get the impeller out. As you can see, I've already removed it here. Removing the impeller is very careful work. You have to make sure that you don't break the impeller blades. But basically you just have to yank the impeller off the motor shaft, which is pressed on pretty tightly. But I found that adding a drop of sewing machine oil actually allowed the impeller to slide right off a lot easier, which was really nice. And then you just use a nut driver or pliers to remove the two nuts to get the motor out. You also need to unsolder these two wires down here, one here, and then this is actually a tab attached to that. I'm not going to show you this motor servicing because it's the same as any other motor at this point for the Lionels. But what I do want to show you is this mechanism here. This is the, I guess you call it it's not really a relay, it's a trigger mechanism. Basically functions, and I'll show you. Alright, so with a little finagling, the coil mechanism actually just falls out of the bottom here. So what this is this is actually essentially a two-position reverse unit, which is functioning as an on-off switch. So every time power is applied, it either triggers it on or off. So when there's an interruption in track power, then the whistle, in theory, should switch to the on or off position to trigger the whistle on or off. However, running this over dirty track can just trigger it sporadically. So what we want to do is remove the bottom plate here, and we'll do that now. So you remove this one screw on the side and the bottom plate comes off. Then you can have access to the plunger. Now there's not a whole lot you can do to service it other than what I did is I'll add a drop of lightweight oil to the shaft, and then also just a drop of lightweight oil to this mechanism here. So this is basically when the plunger pulls the rod up, it'll trigger it either in the on or the off position. And then that actually triggers a switch up here to contact it to turn the motor on. So let's see, this way is off, this way is on. So I'm going to get this loosened up, and then that should allow the whistle to be remotely triggered. Once the whistle motor is cleaned up and everything is put back together, I'm just going to set this here. Once everything is reassembled, which this is not, you will want to test it out, and this is the sound that you'd expect to hear out of a whistle. So that requires a lot of volume of air to blow through the whistle chambers to get both sides of it to sound. The impeller and the motor doesn't spin fast enough to do that, and in reality, you get this. How about the other one?